But that dynamic is going to start to change as monetary policy gets tighter and so on and so forth. So diversify well in those various areas: the country, the currency, the asset class.
I mentioned briefly the idea of crypto, and I know you've had different views of this. A lot of people think of that as a new investment class that has had an enormous run thus far, but also as a way to mitigate, if you will, against the idea of what the value of cash becomes.
Well, I think it's worth... There's an enormous amount of that. How is that going to be dealt with? It has to be dealt with the printing of money.
Right.
So you have those two forces. I think the greater force is the force of those financial assets that the world together will never be able to convert into goods and services because there's just too much of it.
So what do you do? Does that mean you want to be owning as much real estate as possible, levering yourself? Does that say to yourself that crypto and Bitcoin is more valuable than, I mean, this goes back to cash is trash. Where do you put the cash?
Okay. First, no, cash is trash. So don't keep it in cash, right? Second, the most important thing I think that an individual investor or any investor could do is know how to diversify well, because all those asset classes will outperform cash. And so if you, but also risk, when you can diversify well, and when I mean diversify countries, currencies, asset classes, and so on, so that you have that balance. Then you take your tactical moves from there. But the most important thing, I think, is to know how to diversify well. I think most people are not doing that. I think most people think, okay, it's the stock market. And the stock market, I think, is relatively attractive in relationship to the alternatives. But that dynamic is going to start to change as monetary policy gets tighter and so on and so forth. So diversify well in those various areas: the country, the currency, the asset class.
I mentioned briefly the idea of crypto, and I know you've had different views of this. A lot of people think of that as a new investment class that has had an enormous run thus far, but also as a way to mitigate, if you will, against the idea of what the value of cash becomes.
Well, I think it's worth considering all the alternatives to cash and all the alternatives to some of the financial assets. And so Bitcoin is a possibility, is that a merit? I have a certain amount of money in Bitcoin. It's a small percentage of that which I have in gold, which is a relatively small percentage of what I have in my other asset classes and so on. And I think that has the merit. It's an amazing accomplishment to have brought it from where that programming occurred to where it is in the test of time. On the other hand, if it's successful, it's going to not be, the governments don't want to have it successful. You don't want to have an alternative currency.
But we're starting to see governments like El Salvador. I know that's not exactly going to be the leading government on this, but there are governments that may take this on.
But no. You have El Salvador taking it on, and you have India and China getting rid of it, and you have the United States talking about how to regulate it, and it could still be controlled. So that's what it looks like. If you're El Salvador and you talk about your alternative monies, you know, it's a different thing.
Do you believe that regulation ultimately will make something like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have a future, or do you think regulation will kill it?
Well, I think regulation, I think at the end of the day, if it's really successful, they'll kill it, and they'll try to kill it, and I think they will kill it because they have ways of killing it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have, a place, a value, and so on. But it's one of those things that has.
But if they kill it, right now
it doesn't have intrinsic value. If you put cryptocurrencies, or let's say Bitcoin, in the historical perspective, right? There are so many things in a historical perspective that were given that didn't have intrinsic value and have perceived value, and then became hot, and then they become cold. And so it could be either way. You just have to know what it is, right? I mean, like, it could be tulips in Holland. you know, and the intrinsic value. So what is the value? And then there are technological changes. I'm no expert on that. I'm just trying to say that you asked me what my opinion is. Take it for what it's worth. I'm no expert on it. I think diversification values, it matters. I suspect the real question that investors should be asking themselves is how much stuff like that do they have? How much stuff do they have? Do they have gold? Okay, should we be talking about how much you have in gold versus how much you have in Bitcoin? And do you have a diversification in those kinds of things that we might call intrinsic value money? Because we have a fiat monetary system, okay? With a fiat monetary system, where is your hard money? That's the question, and however you go after it, I think that's the question to be answered.
Okay, there's two other pillars to the conversation we're having here. When you spelled out three different sort of pieces of machinery, I think actually maybe 5 in total, but let's focus on the 3. The political environment right now, you have long talked about taxes and inequality and what's happening here. Overlay that on top of what you just said.
Well, we have large wealth and opportunity gaps. You know, a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece which was called "Why and How Capitalism Needs to Be Reformed," because besides not being fair,